Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we have a very special guest, and I'm very excited to introduce him. He has been on the scene for over 40 years and has worked with many greats from Dizzy Gillespie, Wynton Marsalis, Pat Metheny, Anaja Allen Gums, and he was the bass player for the legendary pianist McCoy Tyner for over 20 years. He is a bassist, composer, educator, and record label owner. Please welcome to Jazz Talk the legendary Mr. Avery Sharpe. Brother, how are you?
Great to be here, man. Great to see you.
Yeah. It's been a minute. You know, like I said, the last time we talked was at the Kennedy Center. Forgot what I think something was going on with Archie Shepp or some artist, but that was the last time I saw you.
Jazz Masters.
Yeah, that's it. Jazz Masters.
I was there with Archie to support Archie because I was part of the video that they did on it.
That's right. Well, man, like I said, it's good to have you on. You know, Avery, we know a lot about you as far as a musician, the people that you've worked with, but we don't know too much about your humble beginnings. I understand that you are from Georgia.
Yeah, I was born in Georgia. I'm number 6 of 8 kids.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about your humble beginnings and how you got involved in music.
Well, my biggest influence is my mother. She's I come out of the Church of God in Christ.
Amen. Okay.
Pentecostal, Sanctified, Holy Roller Church, whatever you want to call it. And I was born in Georgia during the segregated South when it was legal. And my father was in the service. He was, he fought part of the Great Generation, Depression, and fought in World War II. And he was born in Georgia, but moved to Florida, where my mother was when he was a kid.
Okay.
And so we did a lot of, service brat. We did a lot of moving around. And like I said, I'm number 6 of 8 kids, and my mother taught all of us piano because she was piano in the church. And those of you who know anything about the Church of God in Christ, the Pentecostal church, church is not just Sunday.
That's right.
Church is all week.
Yeah.
We're Sunday was just a wash. Don't make any plans. Don't make any plans for Sunday. Start out 10 o'clock Sunday school till about 11:30. From 11:45 to about 2 o'clock, or whenever the Lord touched the minister's heart to let you go.
Yeah. And
then we would come home and eat and come back for YPWW, which was basically young people's Bible study at 6:30. And then you have 8 o'clock regular service that night, which would go to about 9:30, 10 o'clock. Monday, you might be off. Tuesday, you might have prayer. Wednesday might be women's Bible study. Thursday, choir rehearsal. Friday, regular church service at 8 o'clock. As a kid in the 60s, I didn't really dislike that because the Wild Wild West, Jim West was on Friday nights, and I had to go to church. And then Saturdays, you might be off, or you might fellowship. There might be a program with another church, and they might have a program, and then it starts all over again. My mother, being a piano player, was there all the time. And we're 2 years apart up to me. And then between me and my baby sister is 6 years, and between my baby sister and baby brother is 6 years. So I was the first one who really got a chance to spend some time with my mother.
Okay.
Because after 2 years, there's another child. So I went everywhere with her. And she would do, tent revivals, everything, and just revivals in the church. If a visiting minister or traveling evangelist came through, that means they would cancel the programs and we would be in church every night. And we'd have service every night. And he might stay an extra week if the Lord touched his heart to stay another week, i.e. they may have not have raised enough money for him that first week. So that's where I started playing piano at 8 years old. My mother gave all of us piano players, and it just kind of stuck with me.
Yeah.
And then like I said, I was born in Georgia. I went to Guam for a couple of years with my father when I was a baby, and then came back and lived in Savannah, Georgia for 7 years. And so that's where I really got all the music, in terms of the Pentecostal sanctified music, hearing that music every night.
Mm-hmm.
The rhythms. It was different back then. My mother would be playing a piano, upright piano. You might have a sister playing a big bass drum, and of course tambourines, and all those rhythms that I heard as a kid influenced me in terms of even some of my writing, even some of my orchestral writing.
Mm.
And then my father we got stationed in Plattsburgh, New York. Now remember, this is a segregated South, so I didn't have any white friends until I was like 10 years old, because then we moved to Plattsburgh, New York. So we went from the South to Plattsburgh is almost to the Canadian border,
Right.
where there's nothing but snow. And we lived on base. When we were in Savannah, we lived off base, in the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
And so my father was 39 years old at the time, 7 kids.
Oh.
Our big brother hadn't been born yet, and he had fought in 2 wars, and they wanted to send him to Vietnam. So he was like, this happened like in April 1965. He came home, he said, we're out, we're gone.
Wow.
So we're going to Massachusetts. I said, Massachusetts? We don't know anybody. We don't have relatives there. He said, exactly. So because my mother had done a revival or something in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Uh-huh.
One of the ministers from up in Plattsburgh and told my father about Springfield, because there was a Air Force base called Chicopee, Westover Air Force Base, which was in Chicopee, Mass, right next to Springfield.
Mm-hmm.
And she thought it would be a good place to retire. So my father he was through. He was through with the service. Like many Black men of his generation, this happened in World War I, that really happened in every war. Mm-hmm. After, Black men were fighting, quote unquote, fascism and, everything else, and to come home and to be, lynched, and the way you were treated at home, it had a profound effect on him. And once you go through that experience, it gives you have trouble adjusting back to this society.
I can imagine.
Of being a second-class, third-class citizen.
Mm-hmm.
So he just could not go back south in the mid-'60s. So that's how we wound up in Springfield, Massachusetts. And, I went to junior high school in Springfield. And then I went to the University of Massachusetts, where I met people like Archie Sharpe was there.
You studied with Reggie Workman too, didn't you?
Max Roach was there.
Yeah.
Max was not just, he lived in Amherst. I used to see him. Reggie Workman was coming up from Brooklyn, I think, a couple times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Fred Tillis, who helped form the jazz department. Horace Bory, who was a gospel historian and a gospel singer in his own right.
Yeah.
So, it was, Billy Taylor was working on his doctorate at that time. Bill Cosby, before it became a bad word, was actually working on his master's and his doctorate at the time, in education. Mm-hmm. Sonia Sanchez was there. It was just a lot of, it was really, as I think Roland Wiggins said, that great Roland Wiggins said that they were trying to really form a Black think tank, which was happening. It was an incredible period. Mm-hmm. And I just happened to be there at the time. And when I first started playing, I was playing electric bass, because once again, in the Pentecostal church, you got to do something. You got to be in the choir. You got to be on the usher board. I didn't like being in the choir because you had some people who could really sing, and I used to get headaches. And then I didn't like being on the usher board because you had to stand up through the entire service. And I remember being at the back of the church, and there was just an organ player, the minister's son.
Yeah.
And I had just started playing electric bass. I said, man, nobody's playing bass. This was before churches now have bands and stuff. It's totally different. And I started playing electric bass in church at 16. And, jazz, Black music is all connected and very similar. It's just what you have on your mind. Gospel music, jazz, blues. It's all interconnected. And so, I learned, quote unquote, my 2/5 changes in church. And so, once I got to the University of Massachusetts, I heard about Reggie Workman. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I saw somebody on that level play upright bass. I started hearing upright bass. I started
Yeah.
listening to the CTI record label stuff, that had, in the 60s and 70s had George Benson,
Oh, yeah. Ron Carter, all these guys
Washington,
on
Ron
there.
Carter, all those cats, yeah.
Yeah.
And I started hearing Ron Carter's sound, and I was like, oh, man. Then I had found, I had Reggie Workman there, cat who played with John Coltrane.
Mm-hmm.
And so Reggie was actually my first upright bass teacher. I never had a lesson on electric. That was all self-taught.
Wow.
A friend of mine came over from high school, showed me how to tune it. I got a book, and I just ran from there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Reggie said to me, he says, electric is your generation, but he says, don't stop playing it, because he says, you've only been playing it a little while and you really got it up under your hands. He said, but spend most of your time on upright.
Yeah.
And the one thing he said that really got me and that really made me continue was, he said, you're going to want to quit. I didn't know what he was talking about until I started playing. And you start getting calluses, hands started bleeding, you have to build up. And I'm walking around campus, daggone near in tears, thinking that nobody's going to hire me for this stupid thing anyway. Why am I playing it? I might as well just stick to electric. And then I just remember him saying, don't quit. Whatever you do, don't quit. And so, I got through that whole thing. But I studied only with Reggie for a year, and after that he left the University of Massachusetts. But people like Archie Sharpe and Horace Boyer were the first to take me under their wings. And then Max, I didn't realize Max dug me as much as he did.
Wow.
But to show you how rudiment I was, I couldn't really read chord changes, even though I had done music. Jazz is totally different. And so I auditioned. I couldn't get into Max's
Really?
class.
Oh.
First, I got it in the next year. I studied with Fred Tillis, and Horace Boyer helped me, and Archie. As a matter of fact, Archie, the first year I started playing bass, I used to go to Archie's house. And I told my father, I said, man, these cats, like Archie and Horace Boyer, they're taking like an interest in me. They're taking like extra time to spend with me. And my father was just saying, well, obviously they see something in you that you don't. And I would go to Archie's house and he would play piano. And he'd go, I'd be playing bass. He'd go, oh no, man, Garrison would have played it like this, he'd play the left hand.
Right.
And so these were my, it's hard to get those cats together in New York. And here I had them on a campus setting. And like I said, I once I got into Max's classes, I didn't realize he dug me that much. As a matter of fact, my girlfriend, who's my wife now, childhood sweethearts, I came in 1976. Max came back and did a concert at Amherst College, and Reggie was with him. Billy Harper was on saxophone, and Cecil Bridgewater was the quartet.
The trumpeter, yeah.
Yeah, and I went backstage to invite Archie to not Archie, Reggie, to my wedding. And, Max is like a few feet away from me. And Max goes, you marrying that nice girl? I said, yeah. He said, I'll be there. So he invited himself. So I gave him the address and he showed up.
Oh,
and he was down front with his, I never got the footage from him. He was down front with a camera.
Right.
His twins at the time, his youngest girls were there. They were like 4 or 5 years old. I can't remember. And he gave the toast at my wedding, and I was like, wow. And then I found out he knew my father. My father had taken him to the airport a few times.
That's incredible.
So, and then, getting back to Archie, I would do regional gigs, with Archie in Massachusetts, Vermont, that kind of stuff, on electric and some on upright. And then most people thought I was a music major, but I was actually an economics major. My undergraduate degree is in economics. But I did all the playing, and everyone thought I was a music minor.
Right.
Reggie had got me into the music program, but as a minor. And as a minor, I just could take whatever I want. They didn't bother me. But economics, it wasn't like an economics degree, from Harvard or somebody. You're not going to go work on Wall Street at UMass. It was more radical.
Right.
Marxism, that kind of thing, which, like I said, I did a lot of playing, and then when I got out of school, I worked as an insurance claims adjuster for about 3.5 years before I started going on the road. But all through that time, I started my family, had my first child.
Mm-hmm.
The bicentennial year, 1976, I graduated from college, got married, had my first child, and I was an insurance claims adjuster for Aetna Life and Casualty. I can say that, and it was a type of day gig where if it took you 20 hours a week to do your job, that was your business. If it took you 80 hours a week. So I would hang with the older guys. I hope I'm not going off too much on this.
No, man, this is good. This is good. Please just talk, share.
I would go off. I would go and hang with the older cats because that's what my father did. My father always hung with older men, and I hung with my father. Right. And I actually started working for my father when I was 13 after he got out of the service.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would hang with the older cats to see what they did. And some of them were doing some stuff. They were giving a lot of their paperwork to the secretaries to do, or the people that were under them. I was a young kid. I couldn't do that, But I was doing, I was what they call an outside claim representative.
Mm-hmm.
I did workman's compensation. Some cats would say, man, I thought you sold insurance. I said, no, I didn't sell insurance. I had a company car, expense account,
right,
big salary. And if it took me, like I said, if it took me 20 hours a week to do my gig, that was my business. If it took me 80 hours a week. So what I would do, I found out really in a corporate setting, especially during that time, you really, in an 8-hour day, you really only get 3 to 4 hours of actual work done.
Yeah.
The rest of the time is at the water cooling, jiving,
Exactly.
So I said, could y'all give me a key to the office? And I would come in at 6 o'clock, 2 hours before they opened, do all my paperwork, dictation, whatever it is I had to do. So by the time 9 o'clock, 9:15 came, I had pretty much done all my work for the day.
Okay.
So then I would go and see clients who I had to see, I guess, like I said, I do workman's compensation. I have to go to see an insured or a factory or whatever that we insured. And then I was doing graduate class. I went back to graduate school. I was doing, big band and orchestra in the afternoons. And
so you were continuing, you were still playing during that time when you were
Oh yeah, I was averaging like 4 hours of sleep a night, raising my family.
Wow.
I was on a mission. I was in about 3 or 4 bands. I was, it was nuts. And like if I had a gig in Boston, I would do my dictation on the way, on the breaks. I would go back out to my car,
right,
do my paperwork. The cats thought I was crazy, which I was. I was on a mission. And as far as I was concerned, that day gig, people say, what do you do for a living? I say, I'm a musician. They say, well, I thought you did insurance. Well, in my mind, even though that was a major gig, it was part-time in my mind in terms of what I was pursuing. I would tell the Aetna, I'm a company man. I'm going for my MBA, my master's in business. I do music as a hobby, but I really wasn't. I was getting more and more into it. And but that's how I was able to do all I did. If I was just, it's like I tell, younger people, even my kids. Well, my kids are older now; they're adults. But with those who pursue the arts, if you've just been bitten by the bug and that you just have to do this, you just have to do it. I mean, given the conditions that are today and everything that's the challenges that we have, even some of my students, they ask me, would you do this now? And I have to say, I think about it and I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. I just, it's just a form of expression that I have to do, and you'll figure it out. And like I said, I was on a mission, raising my family in graduate school. I didn't finish graduate school because I started, Archie Sharpe was the first cat. I didn't really play with Archie for a couple of years. And then Charles Greenlee, a great trombone player, used to work with Archie, used to work with Dizzy Gillespie. And I think Charles is on African Brass with Coltrane.
Coltrane. Avery, I was just going to ask you real quick. I was reading, in addition to Archie, that Art Blakey was also another person that was responsible for bringing you into prominence. Is that true?
got a little story behind that.
Okay.
So this is like, okay, I graduated in 76. I'm doing all this craziness in terms of playing, still studying, still raising my family, still doing gigs. It was just crazy. So, and Charles Greenlake, as I said, was living in Springfield at the time, and he was, they had a cultural affairs office, which he was head of, mayor's office, cultural affairs. He was bringing people up, bringing Archie Shepp up, bringing a bunch of, doing a bunch of concerts. And he put together a concert. He said, Archie, I don't know if you've heard Avery in a while, man, but he's hitting now. So he put together a concert, because I hadn't really worked with Archie in a couple of years since I was like in school. And Archie was like, yeah, so when he put together the Attica Blues Big Band, he had done Attica Blues, back in 71, I believe, and he reformed that band and was going to take it to Europe in 79. So it was my first time going to Europe. I was still working my day gig now at the time. So I took 10 days off or 2 weeks off or whatever it was. And like I said, I never told him what I was doing. Like, oh, music is a hobby. I'm just
right.
So we get to Europe, and we record we do a live recording in Paris at Palais de Glace, 3 nights, and they finished the recording in 2 nights. So the third night that we were there, we just played for the audience, and it was like a band. I think had about 30 people in it. We had Jolie Wilson was on vocals, Marion Brown was in the group. Steve Torre was in the group. Good Lord. John Purcell, Clifford Jarvis was on drums. Brandon Ross on guitar. Clyde Kreiner, keyboard player. It's my generation. So there was young cats and there was some older cats there.
Right.
And so I was playing electric. Actually, Archie wanted me to play electric more on this tour, but my upright playing was getting so much better that I wound up playing mostly upright.
Right.
He had Hakeem Jami, who was playing upright and tuba on both. He wound up playing just mostly tuba, and I think he really only played upright on maybe on one tune. But anyway, so we're at the concert, Palais de Glace, the third night, and Clyde Kreiner, the keyboard player, had written this calypso. And so we started playing, he starts the calypso. I'm looking at Clyde, and Clifford Jarvis is to my, my left, the drummer's to my left. All of a sudden, I hear the drums play. I said, wow, Clifford's playing something hip tonight, I look over, and it's Art Blakey on drums.
Wow.
So we did the gig, and at the end of it, James Williams, that's the first time I met James.
Yeah, James Williams.
And a bunch of cats are running up to me and saying, Art wants to meet you, blah, 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 blah. So James takes me over and introduced me to Art. And Art goes, when I change my bass player, I want you to be in my band. So I was like, okay, cool, thanks, blah, blah, blah. We leave, and I go to Charles Greenley. I said, he's not going to call me. And Charles goes, man, if he says he's going to call you, he's going to call you. So I didn't think too much of it.
Right.
This was in October 79. The end of 79, beginning of 1980, I did my second tour with Archie. Now, remind you, I'm still working my day gig.
Right.
So the tour was supposed to be 4 weeks. So I had my second child, was born on the 22nd, December 22nd. I brought him home to the 25th. I go back to work on the 26th. My wife calls me and says, Archie says y'all are leaving tonight. I was like, what? So she packs everything. We get on the plane. Boom, I go. And we start the tour. And believe it or not, I met Abby Lincoln.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Max, Abby Lincoln,
a while ago. Yeah.
And Freddie Waits and Hilton Ruiz. I met them. And I didn't think too much of it. They were playing at a club in Paris or something like that, early at the beginning of the tour. And so anyway, we do the tour. Now, granted, I told Etna that I was taking my vacation, 4 weeks of my vacation up front. I didn't tell them what I was doing.
Right.
So the tour was supposed to be 4 weeks. They extended it, and we started it early. So it wound up being more like 5.5 weeks. So in the middle of that tour, I get a, you know, I'm in Italy, and people who know anything about Italy back during that time in 1980, the phone system was just horrible. So I used to make all my phone calls from the post office,
Right.
and it wasn't a great connection. So I call home, and wife says, Art Blakey calls. He wants you to be in his band. I was like, oh Lord. And she also said, yeah, your Aetna call. They want to know what's going on. I'm like, what do you mean what's going on? I'm on vacation. What does it matter? But so then I called, I had to call Aetna to let them know what was going on. And at the time, we had one of the few Black claims managers. As a matter of fact, he helped train me when I went to Hartford for training in Hartford, Connecticut. And then he was one of the instructors, and he became one of the claims managers in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I think one of the few Black ones. And the type of job that I had at that time, there weren't a lot of Black folks in those positions. We had two technical cats, myself and another brother. We both left at the same time, but that's another story. And so I had to call John. I can't remember John's last name, and I don't want to say it anyway. So I'm in Italy. I call, John. Yeah, Avery. Yeah, what's going on? We just want to know what's happening. Are you in Europe? John, man, it's a bad connection. I'll have to call you later. Goodbye. So I get home. So now check this out. Now the end of the tour, the tour's supposed to end. We'd already gone over. You know, I told him I'd be gone 4 weeks. I left early, and now we're at the end of 5 weeks. And I'm getting ready to go home. I go to Archie's hotel. He opens the door. He's standing there with the ticket, you know, my ticket in his hand. He's standing in, he comes to the door. He's at his hotel room. He's standing in his underwear. And he goes, yeah, Brother Sharpe, we're getting ready to do a recording with Abby Lincoln and blah, blah, blah. I'm not listening. I don't hear Abby Lincoln's name. All I hear is that I'm late from my gig. I haven't seen my son.
Right.
Newly born. I'm in trouble. So he's just talking, and finally he looks at me. He goes, because I'm not paying attention, because I'm looking at the ticket in his hand. He goes, you're not staying, are you? I said, nope. Grab the ticket. I'm out. Gone. So it's funny. Every time I hear the record was with Freddie Waits, Abby Lincoln, of course, Archie Sharpe, Hilton Ruiz, and they got Jack Gray.
Okay.
To play bass. I get back home. Of course, if you're gone 5.5 weeks, you're going to be behind on your work. Anybody. Yeah. It just takes you a couple of months, and you catch it back up.
Right.
So there was a guy that was in my line, was not in my line of really work, but he didn't particularly care for me. So he went through my files and saw that I was behind. I'm like, no kidding, Sherlock. I've been gone 5.5 weeks. It takes anybody who goes away for a vacation, it takes time to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, well, you're behind and blah, blah, blah. And during that time, now remember now, Art Blakey had asked me to be in his band.
Right.
And so now I have this dilemma whether or not I'm going to quit my day gig, a good gig, and go with Art Blakey. And so I'm equivocating. This opportunity has come up, and my father gave me, it was three things that happened that gave me the biggest vote of confidence. My wife said, you're going to have to do music because you're making us miserable. You're not doing what you want to do in life. Mm. The second was my father, who was always proud that he was able to raise 8 kids. All of us were, at least undergraduate degree, professional. And he says, don't worry, son. You said you'll feed your family. He says, I gave you that. Mm. Like, whoa. Pops thinks, he knows, you know what you've put in a child, the thought process. And then John, remember the claims manager, the Black claims manager, brings me in his office. Now I'm going back and forth whether or not I should quit my job. You know, I got a family, I got a house payment, I got car payments, and because I got middle America out of the way at 23. And so he brings me in the office. He goes, well, Avery, you're gonna have to make up your mind whether or not you're gonna do insurance or music. I was like, John, thanks. He goes, what do you mean? I said, man, when you put it like that, there is no choice. You have my 2-week notice now. I'm gone.
Wow.
I said, here I've been going back and forth, but to hear you verbalize it, I said, that's not even a choice. I'm gone. Okay. Oh, through this time, I forgot. All this time so when I got back, I worked really hard to get once I decided to leave the last 2 weeks, I caught up on my files in 2 weeks. So in the interim, Art Blakey and McCoy Tyner had the same management, Jack Whittemore. I think Jack used to also manage Miles Davis or something back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, the night that I got home from the tour with Archie, McCoy Tyner was playing at Amherst College. So I didn't get back in time to see McCoy. I never saw McCoy play live until I worked with him. Because every time he came to town, I was always working. And so McCoy says the first time he heard my name was from Charles Greenlee. Because Charles went to the concert. I was a big fish in a little pond. Charles was saying, you got to hear this bass player, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then McCoy heard my name again from Jack Whittemore because he was, managing Art. Charles Fambro, who was the bass player with McCoy at the time, left. Mm-hmm. And I heard that Charles had left, so I called Jack and I said, heard McCoy's bass player left. Can you just ask McCoy to give me a call? He said, but you're supposed to be with Art. I said, yeah, but just ask him to give me a call. I didn't think too much of it.
Right.
McCoy was trying to reach me on my job. And then I'm doing gigs with Art. But I told Art, I said, Art, I need a month to get my affairs in order before I can go on the road.
Right.
I'm willing to quit my day gig for you. I just need a month to get it in order. So we're doing a month or two, whatever it was, just a short period of time. So we're doing gigs. I'm doing gigs in New York. The first night that I played with Art was the first night that Marcellus sat in with Art. When it was 18. And then we went to a couple other places, regional. And then we went to Boston. We went to Lulu White's club in Boston. Mm-hmm. Went and came up. Branford had convinced him to come up. Branford was at Berkeley. Kevin Eubanks, Frank Lacey. I think Terrence might have been. Donald Harrison was in school at that time. They all sat in through that time. And as a matter of fact, Terry Lynn Carrington, who was Terry must have been like 13 or 14. And I get funny story. I knew her brother.
I just recently had her on the show too. Yeah.
I had her, I knew her father.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I are like in the back, in the dressing room. We're the only ones there. And She goes, I wonder if Art's going to let me sit in tonight. And I'm thinking to myself, what's this girl talking about? There's something wrong with her. I said, maybe she's got, some condition or whatever. She said, I don't want her to sit in. And sure enough, at the end of the night, Art calls her up. Boom, blam, blam, blam. She smiles like, oh my goodness, So anyway, now check this out. McCoy had been trying to reach me. I told Art I need, some time to get my day gig in order before I can start going on the road. Mm-hmm. Last night, Sunday night, we're in the dressing room. Art goes, okay, we're getting ready to go to, I think it was Cleveland on Tuesday. I said, Art, man, I told you I can do the weekends. It's no problem, but I'm not ready to go on the road. I need some more time. So Art just loses, goes off. And Bobby Watson, was in the band. Billy Pierce goes, Bobby, I don't know what's wrong with these bass players. And he's going off. And while he's doing this, bartender comes to the dressing room and goes, Avery, there's a phone call for you. So I go to the bar. It's McCoy.
Wow.
McCoy goes, yeah, I've been hearing a lot of great things about you. And, and I got a rehearsal tomorrow. And can you make it? And I said, I guess I can, because Art is canceling on me. And I did the rehearsal, and it was really a rehearsal audition. And I have to say, the first tune he gave me, I destroyed it. I did not play it well at all. It was Festival in Bahia.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who knows Festival in Bahia, it's got all these bass jumps. I was like, did he give me the lead sheet with the melody? I jacked it up. And I remember thinking in my head, I gotta apologize, Mr. Tyner. I'm sorry you wasted your money bringing me here, but I can't play your music. And then he did another tune, and I was cool after that. Killed it. It was great. So then I told McCoy, I said, look, I just had this issue with art. I told him I needed, some time to get my affairs in order. McCoy said, no problem. We did a gig that weekend. It was a duo. At the time, John Blake was in the band, but John was actually working with, taking off time to work with Locksmith, the band that was with Grover Washington, because John had played with Grover.
Mm-hmm. And
Joe Ford and George Johnson was the drummer at the time, Guillermo Franco, and of course McCoy. And the first time I played with him, Guillermo Franco had this whole thing happen, this whole percussion thing happening. I spent half the concert watching Guillermo because I was like just fascinated. Of course, McCoy, but it was like he had, percussion stuff going. It was just the whole show. So we did 2 nights. I think it was at the University of Michigan. I think it was in Ann Arbor. And the second night, and I reminded, every so often I would tell McCoy what he told me. He says, I got a good feeling about you. I've been telling my wife about you. He goes, I think we've been put together for a reason. And I kind of blew my mind because I'm like, 20-something-year-old kid. And this is like one of my idols telling me he thinks we've been put together for a reason. And of course, 20-something years later,
amazing.
It was definitely a reason.
Avery, I was just going to say real quick, I always thought you were the perfect bass player for him because he's very percussive, the way that he plays, and your style fits with him perfectly. Because like I said, he's had other bassists like Charlotte Moffett and a few others, but that consistency, you played with him for over 20 years, man. That says a lot. And I think all the times that I saw him, you were the bass player with him. Early 90s. And were you playing, I think you were with him when he did that New York reunion. I think Joe Henderson was in the group at that time.
No,
91.
No, I didn't do that. I can't remember who the bass. It might have been Cecil McBee, or maybe it was Ron Carter. I think it was Ron Carter.
Okay. Yeah, it was Ron Carter. You're right.
But I did, a lot of stuff with a lot of all-star. The great thing about working with McCoy, number one, he was, people. I remember years ago, Mulgrew Miller thought that he goes, because Mulgrew and I did a gig together with a singer or something. I can't remember. I think it might have been in Brooklyn or something. And we were talking. He goes, yeah, aren't you McCoy's nephew? I was like, no, we're not related. I'm not from Philly.
Right.
I said, could it just be that he digs me? That's why we've been together for so long. But people thought that I was related to McCoy. And getting back to that fit, I always loved McCoy's left hand.
Yes.
And when I first got with McCoy, there were some bass players who didn't like McCoy playing all that left hand. I loved it. To double that stuff with him, I was like, how cool is that?
Yeah.
So I always, and sometimes McCoy would play certain things, like especially once he starts doing upper extensions and so forth, and he might hit a prominent note. It might be the 4th or the 5th. And
right.
Sometimes as a player, you might have a tendency to want to go play that note that he's playing, but you're leaving the root, which forms the entire chord. And so when I did that a couple of times, he looked at me like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, don't play that note. That's just." He's bringing that out in his playing, but you keep that root so he can do those extensions. And so, and another funny thing, Harold Mayburn, one time we were at the Village Vanguard, and, Harold came to hear the trio play, and I think it might've been with Louis Hayes, or it might've been with Aaron Scott at the time.
Aaron Scott, the drummer, yeah.
Yeah, it might've been Aaron Scott with the trio. And Harold comes up to me. He goes, "Man, that last tune y'all did, that was a killing bass line." He goes, "Was that your line or McCoy's?" And I had to think about it for a second. I said, "Oh, that was my line, but I think that's what he would have played." You know, so it it becomes almost like a marriage where you know
Mm-hmm.
what your other counterpart's going to do. I remember Bruce Lundvall from Blue Note.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah, he came to see us play one time, and he goes, "Man, Avery, you and McCoy got something else happening here now."
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's what happens. I mean, that's why, you know, Miles's group, you know, with Herbie and Wayne, and you know, Coltrane's group with McCoy, those cats played together so much that it becomes like, you know, personality-wise, you may have different personalities, but musically, you kind of become like one. It kind of becomes like a marriage. You don't really have to do a lot of talking. You can see where things are going. And I played with McCoy for so long that near the end, I could see he would look up from the piano and look at me like, "Where can I go that this cat won't know that I'm going?" And I could see him look down at the piano, and I knew where he would be going. Just, you know,
yeah,
and it's
that's
like,
great, man. That's great.
So it's good in one respect. That's great, but after a while, it becomes like, you know, this cat just knows what I'm going to play. But the funny thing about it, McCoy is that kind of player. He's that sensitive that, you know, I remember we did a quartet with Freddie Hubbard, and Freddie goes, "McCoy, stop playing so much, man. You're playing me before I play me. In other words, you know what I'm going to play before I know what I'm going to play." And I thought about that.
Avery, you just made me think about something. I have an interview with McCoy DVD. It's they're overseas. I think they're in Europe somewhere, but I have an interview with McCoy and Freddie. And the guy asked, he says, "Freddie, you've played with so many great pianists. You know, what's the difference playing with someone like McCoy Tyner and Herbie Hancock?" And Freddie says, "Both of them are great." He says, "You know, Herbie plays synthesizers." He says, "But when it comes to the natural thing," he says, "I prefer McCoy." He says, "Playing with McCoy Tyner is like playing with 3 piano players." Yeah. I'm like, wow, you know.
No, that's very true. As a matter of fact, when I first started, after I started playing with McCoy and started forming my own groups and my own recordings, you will notice that a lot of times the people that I used were the people who had played with McCoy. Number one, because we were friends, and because they understood that whole intensity that McCoy brought. And when I would play with other pianos, I'd be like, "Dang, what's wrong with the piano player?"
Yeah.
And I'd be like, "Well, it's not McCoy, because McCoy sounds like 3 or 4 piano players."
Right.
The piano player sounds like everybody else.
Right.
He sounds like a normal piano player. It's just that I've gotten used to hearing, you know, this whole thing. And, but, you know, McCoy was really a special cat.
Yeah, I mean, they said he's the most influential pianist of the last 60 years. I've heard some people say after Bud Powell is McCoy Tyner. And I agree with that. You know, he influenced so many people.
Bud Powell was a big influence on McCoy. So people forget that McCoy, he's an all-around piano player. I mean, he's known for what he's known and created. But you listen to his earlier stuff, he sounds, you know, like Bud Powell.
Yeah.
And he's playing behind behind singers. You know, in Philly, he played behind everybody. He did all kinds. He's a really sensitive cat. And people say, "You like, who's your favorite person to comp behind?" I say McCoy Tyner, because McCoy. And it's funny that earlier you mentioned about my percussive way that I play. McCoy, what I really loved about McCoy is that he gives you space. I mean, the man will play everything under the sun, and then when it would come bass solo, he'd stop playing. Yeah. So you just hear air. So it's like this cat just played everything in the world, so now you got a solo. And so at first it kind of shook me. I remember Joe Forge goes, "Yeah, man, I don't know why he does that, man. It kind of messes guys up." I loved it because then it gave me freedom. You know, I could hear stuff now. You know, I could play stuff now. I could start low and then build it up, and you know, do some percussive stuff, which I really love anyway.
Right.
And so I'm not going to mention any names, but sometimes when people do piano trios, the bass player may get a chorus or 16 bars through the whole set. The drummer may get a chorus or trading chords, and it's all piano. Now McCoy plays everything under the sun. You got it. Yeah. And if you're hot that night, he'll let you go. You get suddenly there's a lot of bass solos. But also, if the piano's hot, my wife would say, she goes, I'm sorry. She goes, McCoy just drop kicked y'all off the stage. He just played everything. Y'all just need to go sit down. Yeah. And when that would, I mean, he was, like I said, he was that sensitive. If he was hot, it would be more solos, you know, more solo piano. If your bass was hot, it's like, he got it. Yeah, yeah.
Avery, I wanted to ask you about the record label that you formed in 1993. Tell us about that.
Well, my father has, you know, as I said, been a big influence on me. And of course, my mother, you know, with music, but my father in terms of my thought process and even some of my political and social thought process. You know, my father was in the service for 23 years, and he left. He was in the Air Force when he ended. He started out in the Navy during World War II, but like I said, many black males didn't quite get the promotions, didn't quite get, surprises, racism in every aspect of American society. So his whole thing when he got out of the service was not to work for anybody else. That's why he started his own businesses. And when you get your parents at their development, I got him at the development where he was getting out of the service and was like, I'm not working for anybody else. And believe it or not, he was the most patriotic person that you could think of. But when it came to Vietnam, which was my brothers in my era, he was determined not to send us to Vietnam because he said, I was in like junior high and I was taking Spanish. He said, are you taking French? I said, no, Dad, I'm taking Spanish with my friends. And, you know. So when I got in high school, he said, are you taking French? I said, no, Dad, I'm taking Spanish. He goes, I told you to take French because I'm sending you to Montreal. He said, you're not going to Vietnam. He said, this is not a war. He said, I fought a real war. He said, you're going to be fighting for General Motors and DuPont. He goes, no, it's not going to happen. But anyway, so he was a big influence on me in terms of my whole thought process and doing for yourself. And, you know, he owned his own business. And in the music industry, especially at that time, you have to rely on other people, A&R people and the producers, and you got to do this, which I did that. I mean, I went through that. And finally, I said, you know, I can't put my life and my expression on hold for people who don't really know what they're talking about. I got to say it. You know, just because you produced Miles doesn't mean that you know exactly what's happening. In other words, you're not in the trenches. I would rather one of my colleagues, you know, colleagues produce me, who's a person who's a musician, who's in the trenches with me, rather than somebody telling me, what are you going to tell me about the music? When's the last time you've been on stage? Right. So, I mean, this is just me personally, it's probably the radical part of me. And so I was like, I'm sending people tapes to get their opinion. We're the experts. And I used to tell my colleagues, I said, we're the experts. We forget that. They're not the experts. We're the experts in terms of the music. Right. Now, they're supposed to be able to sell it, but we're the experts in terms of what actually should be heard. So I got tired of, you know, sending out demos and talking to people that I knew and record executives. And I'm like, no, I'm going to start my own thing. And at the time I was working with Yusef Lateef. And Yusef had started his own label in 93. I think I did like 7 records with Yusef on his own. As a matter of fact, he won a Grammy, I think, in New Age music. And he was asking me, what's New Age music? He didn't really know what that was the category that they put him in. Right. So 2 things happened. I did a bunch of records with Yusef on his own label, and I ran into, because Yusef was living here in Amherst, Massachusetts, and he was teaching at the 5 college area, you know, at Hampshire, UMass, Smith, Mount Holyoke, and I'm forgetting one, Amherst College. And so one day I ran into him, And he goes, Brother Avery, I think you should start your own label. He says, I'll help you if you need it. And I was like, wow, okay, cool. And then the second thing that happened was I was hanging with Kevin Eubanks.
Guitarist, yeah.
And Kevin goes, man, he goes, this stuff is moving in a different direction. He goes, eventually, we're going to be doing our own records. Now, Kevin said this back in '93. So he said, man, I think you should start your own label too. So I did. Label is JKNM Records, the first initial of each of my children, Jade, Keto, Nkosi, and Maya. Going along with, my father and family. My family was the most important thing to my father. And as you notice, my first record on my label was called Extended Family, which was his influence and my mother's influence.
Right.
So that's how I started my own label. And before it became fashionable and before the industry just blew up, basically. And I used to encourage, I said, McCoy, and McCoy was cool. He would let me sell at that time it was LPs and CDs on the gigs. And as a sideman, I was selling a lot of CDs, and I was like, so I mean, I was fortunate that I had that platform, McCoy's platform, and I also, I'm an economics major, and I'm a person that feels that. And this is not to belittle anything that anybody does, but I feel if you're a human being, average intelligence, and healthy, if you can do it, then I can do it. I can take a page from you. Like I said, not to say what you're doing is easy, but it encourages me. It's like, oh, you did it. I'm encouraged now. I'm not, I'm not spending energy like, how do you do this? I'm like, well, how did you do that? So I can do the same thing, or it's encouragement for me. So, I learned about the business. I used to say that, I'm the record executive, I'm the janitor, I'm the A&R person.
Right.
Anything if you got my record in your hand, it came from me. So I was on the phone, my own publicist. I would call the radio stations. I would call the, when it was print media at the time. I would call and I had gotten a small distribution deal. So I was doing every aspect. I was sending out recordings. I was making the music, I was doing the budgets, doing everything. And like I said, my first record I did for Sunnyside Records with Francois Zolofin.
Okay.
And which he was a great guy. And at that time, he was giving cats opportunities, like in my age group, young cats coming up who weren't getting deals per se. He was recording us. And after I did his record, I was like, wow, I think I can do this. I mean, I get into discussions with my colleagues. Once again, we're the experts. And we're playing some of the most sophisticated music on the planet. So if I can figure out what Oscar Peterson is playing, I can pretty much figure out anything. I just have to move those neurons from one part of my brain to the other. So, and I'm going to get in trouble but I've gotten in trouble with this before. And I'm like, if we're playing this kind of music at that level, we can pretty much do anything, outside of music. Because, I mean, every person has a part of their brain that's more highly developed than the other, whether it be art, whether it be laying bricks, whatever it is, you have something that ours just happen to be music. And if we're doing this highly intellectual, cerebral, and spiritual, obviously, if we're doing this, we can pretty much do it. I can figure out how to lay tile. I can figure out how to do spreadsheets. I can figure out other stuff other than what it is that I'm doing. So I've always had that thought process. And I've always disliked the fact that, well, I'm just an artist. I'm not a business person. No, you are a business person. You're self-employed, which we are all finding out now because of the COVID thing. Yeah. But it's just now we have to use some of that creativity in how do we, and figuring out how do we make this into a living, or keep it into a living? How do we make money out of it? And that has always been the challenge. I mean, it's not like in some other countries that are more who support their artists.
Yeah.
In America, you can't separate the art from the society. We have a capitalistic system that's based on money. They don't care. It's a widget. If it sells, if you have the IQ of an amoeba, they don't care as long as you have $1. You know.
That's right. Everything is money. Yeah. Yeah.
And so once you figure that out, yes, it would be nice if all we had to do was to do music, but we don't live in that kind of society. I mean, this is just me personally, just thinking that. And once again, I have enough confidence that, yes, I can do this. And yes, artists thinking that they're not political. Yes, you are political. Everybody in this country is political. If you say nothing, you're being political. You're allowing somebody, a knucklehead like we have in the White House, because you stood on the sidelines. Well, I didn't vote for him. It's not. Yeah, well, that's part of the problem. That's why we got this idiot now. So if you, well, I don't want to be a capitalist. If you bought gas today, you're contributing to this capitalistic system. Unless you're on an island by yourself and self-sufficient. I'm sorry, folks. It's just a matter of how you want to deal with it. It's not the system, it's the people. Capitalism by itself, unfeathered capitalism. I'm sorry, I'm going off here a little bit. But,
no, it's okay.
The problem with capitalism is that there's human beings involved, which brings in greed and everything else. Fear. Socialism, problem is, you got people involved, which is still going to bring in greed and whatever. So it's not the system, it's the people.
The people. And
how do you put checks and balances on those? Because human beings are human beings. You know, we like to think that, I always like to think the best of humans, but we do have that. There's a cat who wrote a book, I think it's 5% of the human populations are psychopaths. And in all aspects of life. I think they did an experiment back during World War II where they gave, I think if you give me a gun and you tell me to go shoot somebody that I don't know, or if I hear bombs and firing, my first reaction is what? To run away. You give me a gun, tell me to shoot somebody, I'm like, what? That's not a natural human thing.
Right.
But there's 5% of the people that on your side that just been waiting to kill somebody, and there's another 5% on the other side that's been just waiting. Once they start shooting, now we're in it now. So I think that's sort of a thing that kind of happens with everything that you, like I said, I always believe the best of people, but knowing that there is, I guess for less of a better word, evil, you know, which we all kind of have that whole spectrum. We have that good and not so good parts of us. Yeah.
Yeah. Avery, I was just going to ask you, you have a relationship with actress Jasmine Guy. I understand that Jasmine is from Georgia as well. And I guess not long ago, you guys had a play or musical called Raising Cain. Tell us about that and how that whole thing came to fruition.
Well, you know, after I left McCoy, I played with McCoy from 80 to 82, 1980 to 1982. And for about 2 years, I didn't play with him. And I did a lot of freelance, and I worked with the great Danny Holgate. He used to do a lot of stuff on Broadway with black shows. He did Bubble and Brown Sugar, and he did other things. And I worked with a contractor and guitar player, great at Rudy Stevenson, who played guitar in Monica. He did Tap Dance Kid and all this other stuff. And on Broadway, you know, with Phyllis Hyman. And so I started meeting those people after I left McCoy. And I worked with Danny Holgate with Cab Calloway. That's when I first met Cab Calloway, and did some shows with Cab. And so those cats, you know, they loved it. You know, I played with McCoy, and then I, you know, could fit into a show situation. And so they asked me to do the road show, European show for Bubbling Brown Sugar. And Jasmine Guy was like 2021, and Jasmine, most people know her as from the spinoff from the Cosby Show, Different World, Whitley. But she's actually a dancer. That's her. But she's also a singer and actress, triple threat, as they say. So she and I became friends on that tour and stayed in contact all through the years. As a matter of fact, when she first got the show, she was living in New York. She used to come see me play. And I remember we were at Sweet Basil's, and we were sitting at the bar, and she goes, yeah, you know, she was quitting her boyfriend. She's leaving New York. She's going out to LA. She's just had it with New York. And I think within like a week or two, she got that gig, Different World.
Yeah.
And so every time I would come out there, I would, you know, with McCoy or whatever, we would hang out and blah, blah. But that was when I first met her on that tour. It was a 7-month, over a 9-month period, it was 7 months. And we became friends. And so when this project came up, I called Jasmine. I said, Jasmine, I'm doing this play that this classical cellist had written. And I said, it's based on Gene Toomer's literary work, Cain. She goes, oh, Cain, my father loves that work. She goes, yeah. So she came up and she read it. And after the first 5 minutes, it was like a glove, fit like a glove. And the whole basis of it, it was called Raising Cain, which had sort of a double meaning, you know, resurrecting the novel Cain, and also raising Cain. You know, the play was not like Ain't Misbehaving. It wasn't a song and dance. It was a trio.
Okay.
It featured Jasmine Guy. It was basically a one-woman show, but based on the Harlem Renaissance, based on the writings of Gene Toomer, based on the writings of W.E. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, Claude McKay. So it was a multimedia thing. I wrote, it's a fictitious, well, no, I shouldn't say fictitious story, but I wrote music based on the poem. She would recite the poetry. She would dance. So I was originally supposed to write music indicative of the Harlem Renaissance, but some of the poems were timeless. So I decided just to open it up. You know, there's some modern stuff in there as well. And Jasmine used to say that we made her a jazz actress. In other words, she had to improvise. She's just used to like dancing, you know, 1, 2, 3, you know, acting, you block here. So I wrote some things that were sort of improvised as well. So she, behind the poems, so she would have to react to what it was that we were doing. But it was, like I said, it was a multimedia thing. So our set was a video screen behind us where we would have the art from that era as well, from the Harlem Renaissance. We'd have, you know, the storyline would go and you'd have a picture of W.E.B. Du Bois or Zora Neale Hurston.
Right.
So I would say 90% of the music was original music that I'd written. We'd have little snippets of Fats Waller, Ruby Blake, and Duke Ellington, you know, just little snippets. But most of it was written by me. And we toured for about 10 years off and on. And we were at the Apollo. We did the Apollo in New York, which was great. And so we would have periods of time where we wouldn't do it. We would revamp it. And we revamped it in 2014. And it ran from 2014 till about 2017. We did a bunch of gigs, colleges and stuff. And but Jasmine she's really great. And like I said, it showed people a different side of her when you know, people expecting to come see Whitley.
Right.
You know, like, well, she doesn't talk like Whitley. It's like, well, yeah, that's a character. It's like, you know, she's acting, you know. That's not who she is. So when they saw that she was a triple threat, as they say in the business, they were like, whoa. See, I mean, she's a very talented, you know, person. She directs as well. You know, she directed some plays in Atlanta. She was actually born in Boston. but raised in Atlanta. Her
Mm-hmm.
father
Pastor, wasn't he?
Pastored one of the oldest black churches in Georgia. I think he and Maynard, first black mayor of Atlanta.
Yeah.
Can't think of his first name. But they went to school together, and he was also a member of that church. And, you know, Andrew Young, King, like the youngest King daughter, used to actually babysit Jasmine. So she said it's funny to see all these streets named after all these people now that when she grew up,
Yeah.
that her father knew. And she said it's just really interesting and great.
Amazing, amazing. Now, last year you put out a really nice piece, 400, an African-American musical portrait. Tell us about that.
Well, I think that was sort of a culmination of all the things that I've been doing over the years. Because if you check out some of my earlier recordings, I always think, this is me personally, I think artists should write from what they know.
Yeah.
I knew about family, so I have that whole extended family. I did 3 series, extended family, 2 thoughts of my ancestors, and extended family, 3 family values. And then I started thinking about my heroes. I did, one for Jesse Owens. And then I started thinking about my mother, who was a shero. And then I started thinking of my mother. I started thinking about sheroes and the Black struggle. As Jasmine would always comment and say that most people, when you think of females in the Black movement, they only know about Harriet Tubman and Rosa Parks. That's all they mention, not knowing that there's scores and hundreds of women who were prominent in the struggle. And one of the people that I was thinking about was Sojourner Truth. Now, everyone's kind of heard her name, but they don't really know what it is that she's done. And she's famous for that Ain't I a Woman, but they don't really know what she's done. So I thought I wrote a whole, musical thing to her life. First of all, people forget that slavery was not just in the South.
That's right. Right.
13 colonies. Slave. Didn't they find the big slave grave in New York when they were digging years ago? Slavery in Massachusetts. It was all over. And she was a slave owned by Dutch in the Poughkeepsie, New York area. Because when people do her Ain't I a Woman speech, they always kind of do it as a sort of a Southern accent. She didn't know anything about the South until she left slavery.
Right.
So, and she didn't speak English until she was like 9 or 10. And that's because she was bought by an English master, and the English master's wife used to kick her behind because she couldn't speak English. Duh, she just came from Dutch people, but she learned English very fast. And she was actually the first person, once she got out of slavery, she left and went to New York, and she was able to get her son out of slavery. Slavery did end in the North, but people think things are slow now in politics. It was really slow then. So we're going to say that slavery ends in New York State in 1927, but we do it in 1820. I'm sorry. We say it's going to end in 1827. We get passed a law like in 1819, so it takes that long for it to happen.
Right.
But during that, in which people forget that you can't talk about the U.S. without talking about race and slavery, because slavery was the money.
Yeah.
Black folks were money. You could take out loans against your slaves. This country almost destroyed itself for money, slaves, or enslaved people. And so, getting back to what I was saying about Sojourner Truth, her son, her young boy, was still in slavery, and New York passed a law that, okay, slavery is going to end, I can't remember the date, in 18, whatever it was. So since we are property, people are trying to sell their property for your property's worth nothing. But they passed a law saying, no, you can't do that. So people were trying to sell their slaves, down south or whatever it is. No, you can't. You're just going to lose the money. So what happened was her son was sold to, I think, a gentleman from England, and they got to New York. And for some unknown reason, he changed his mind. And then they went back to New York City. They went back to upper state New York, Poughkeepsie. And then he sold her son to a slave owner down south, which you're not supposed to do. He's breaking the law. She sued. I think she's the first Black person, definitely the first Black woman to sue and win. And she had the help of the Quakers, which that's a whole nother story. The Quakers have always been sort of prominent. They kind of talked and walked the talk. They weren't speaking about Christianity and doing something else. They were like, wait, we're all created equal here. So they, with the help of the Quakers, she was able to win her case. And with her son, they moved to New York. But that's a whole nother story. It didn't end well because, the generation that goes through the struggle, no matter when that is, the generation that follows doesn't totally understand it. It's like if you have kids and you've made this struggle and you've built up this thing, your kids don't understand the struggle that you've been through. They think that this is just the way it's always been. And in some cases, they become spoiled brats, which kind of what happened to her son. He moved to New York, started getting into trouble, started hanging with the wrong people, and went into the, I think, Merchant Marines or something, and she never heard from him again. He was writing her letters, but they never got to her, and she never saw him again. And but anyway, so like I said, just thinking about the Sheroes and thinking about Sojourner Truth, it was, she was a abolitionist, a women's suffrage movement, just really a strong force after being into slavery. And then after that, I did another Shero, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. I come out of the Pentecostal church, Church of God in Christ, so did Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And she was actually the Beyonce of her day in the 1930s and 1940s. And people always identify like Sam Cooke or Aretha Franklin, who had that tug between secular and sacred music coming out of gospel. Now I realized that Sister Rosetta Tharpe was actually the first one to do that. And anybody who knows anything about the Sanctified Church, Pentecostal Church, is that I'm not supposed to be playing the music that I'm playing. That's the devil's music. So if you're not playing music for the Lord, it's the devil's music. So Sister Rosetta Tharpe had a contract with the Lucky Milliner Orchestra, which was a jazz orchestra. So she wrote tunes like Up Above My Head, I Hear Music in the Air, the gospel tune. And then the saints, or the congregation of saints, we call them in the Black church and the Pentecostal church, turn on the radio and they would hear Rosetta Tharpe singing, I Want a Tall, Skinny Papa. So so she caught a lot of flack for playing, secular music before Sam Cooke and all these other people. She was the first one to kind of experience that. And, then she was playing blues, and, PBS did a special and called her the godmother of rock and roll because she influenced everybody. She influenced Little Richard, she influenced Chuck Berry, even Frank Sinatra was like, yeah, she had some influence on me. And so I just I did arrangements of her tunes, some of it more modern, some tunes I wrote, for her, and just letting people know that this was an incredible woman. I mean, not only because of the influence that she had on American music, but just the whole way that she lived her life. Number one, she was playing guitar, which was blasphemous in the Church of God in Christ for a woman to be playing guitar. And then there was some questions about, even though she was married, she might have been tipping, sexuality. So she was really sort of a trailblazer in every, sense of the word. And so then, I was in Whole Foods probably about 3 or 4 years ago up in Amherst, Massachusetts. And there's a African-American woman who's a friend of mine who's a kidney doctor, which I can't think of the technical word for kidney doctor. But anyway, she's also an artist, and I had done some projects with her. I mean, she's a visual artist, and I had done some projects with her. And we're in Whole Foods, and she goes, 2020, 2019 is coming. And when she said that, you know, people who study history, especially Black folks, when you say 2019, we know immediately what she means. She means 1619, 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
So when she said that, I just spaced, and I just started hearing music. I just started trying to envision projects. She goes, "You're not listening to me anymore, are you?" I said, "No, you just sparked something here."
Mm-hmm.
So I started thinking about 400, you know, just to acknowledge it. It's not a celebration, y'all. It's just an acknowledgement of Africans and African Americans being in this country. How would I do that? You know, how do I take 400 years and condense it down to a one CD? So I broke it down into centuries. You know, the arrival, 1619, 1719, the colonial period, 1719 to 1819, antebellum, Civil War, you know, 1819 to 1919, and then 1919 to 2019. And so the great thing about art is that it's subjective. So since I have to figure out how to condense this into 60 minutes worth of music.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, if you listen to the recording, sometimes you'll hear two eras in one song, like a new music. I start off with ragtime, and it kind of moves into New Orleans, and not trying to authenticate each era, but just be like some of the era, and then sometimes not, like the arrival. Who knows what the music actually sounded like in 1619? We have an idea of, because of the instruments that, you know, Africans had, and also here. But and arrival, I was actually trying to think. I was thinking more epic, like boom, we're here. However we got here, good and bad, it's like it's an arrival. And so, you know, that's when I put choir, horns, and because I just like big projects anyway.
Mm.
And, so okay, arrival, and then after we arrive here, it's like somebody takes you from your home. What are you thinking?
Yeah.
How do I get back to my home? So that's the second tune, is on how do I get home?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and then so forth from there. And then the colonial period, and then the fiddler in North America, or in America. You know, the banjo and the fiddle or violin, which Africa has precursors to those European instruments.
Right.
So those are the two instruments that we were kind of allowed to play. And just like as you saw in the movie 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah.
He was a musician. He was a violin player. And once again, you cannot divorce the economics from the race in America. If you played an instrument as an enslaved person, your value went up because you have another skill that you can offer. So, you know, there were musicians who played for masters. Some of them were able to make extra money.
Mm-hmm.
You still had to go out and work in the fields. You're not getting out of that gig. But so some of them learned, you know, what the music was of that day, classical music, and then they have, you know, music that Black folks created, plantation music.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where that came from. And, you know, and then I go through the rest of the recording. You know, the antebellum period, as I said before, the new music. It was new music at the time, you know, rag, and New Orleans music, and then the Harlem Renaissance, then World War II, and you have the apex of the Civil Rights Movement. And then the last tune is called 500. And the reason why I call it 500 is that I always like to be optimistic. You know, like I said, I'm always fascinated by what Black folks went through in this country and how they were able to persevere.
Yeah.
And even supposedly we're supposedly savages and ignorant people. You know, people during slavery, you know, when it first started happening, they had enough faith to know that this nonsense would stop someday. You know, if not for me, if not for my kids, not for my grandkids, we know this cannot be. It's not sustainable. And you know, people nowadays, if they miss an episode of Dancing with the Stars, they're ready to slit their throat. You know, it's just so. What's that old Native American? If you do something today, you think this is 7 generations out, that what you're doing now has an effect that far out. So the last tune, 500, I'm thinking about the next 100 years, what it's going to be like for Black folks and just America in general. And I'm always optimistic that things will get better. You know,
Yeah.
the human, it's unfortunate that the human psyche has to have a catastrophic thing to bring out what is really great and good in us.
Mm.
And even though we had enslaved people, a whole nother spirit was kind of born that we're part of, and we forget. Sometimes intentionally, it's been done.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, if I come from people who can go through that, it's like there's nothing I can't do. I mean, we have great, you know, it's great that there's another recognition, you know, with the Black Lives Matter. But knowing what we were, not just in this country, you know, before we came here, the
Right.
dynasties that we had, you know, I don't know when Egypt got removed from Africa, but at some point, I guess it's no longer in Africa. They call it Egypt, but it's in Africa, as far as I can see. Not only that, the cradle of civilization. You go down, even some of those buildings are older when you go down to Sudan and Ethiopia, and which is another project I'm thinking about. You know, going back even further.
Maybe you should write something about the pyramids.
Well, actually, like I said, I want to go further down, you know, because people think of the Nile goes from the south to the north. It doesn't flow the other way around. So everything came up to Egypt and the dynasties that they had before that. And the people that were there didn't look like the people who are there now, which people forget. It's like if you came to America 500 years ago, you'd see native people. You wouldn't see black and white people who, these were the people here 500. No.
Native Americans, yeah.
When you go to Egypt, you see Arabs. Those people didn't look like that. Remember, they conquered. The people look like me.
Yeah.
You know, so that were there before, you know, and now they're starting to find out that, yeah, well, maybe they did look like you if we keep going back further.
Right.
So that, you know, that's kind of what I'm thinking of. And then, like I said, getting back, I'm always just optimistic and always believing in the human spirit will always, the positive part of the human spirit will always come through no matter what's going on. Even now, it just seems like we're in a dark day. And old folks used to say, ill wind doesn't blow the same way all the time. So, and as I tell my students, I said, you know, my folks were the great generation. They had the Depression, World War II that they had to deal with. My generation had Vietnam, the apex of the civil rights movement, gay rights, women's rights, you know, and now your generation's got a bad deal here. Y'all got to deal with the pandemics and whether or not the earth is even going to be here because of climate change. So,
yeah, 2020 has been something else, I tell you. It really has.
Yeah, it's been, I've lost, you know, my mother passed in December. She was 91.
I'm sorry to hear that, man. Wow.
But we lost our oldest sister May 1st from COVID. And so when people start talking about, oh, no, this is a hoax or with the government, Well, it doesn't matter where it came from. My sister's gone.
Yeah.
And we have an incompetent, I'm just going to say, we have an incompetent. That's what happens when you have a reality TV star dealing with reality. This is what you get. So and people are just standing around. I mean, he's responsible for hundreds, thousands of deaths here. If he'd gotten ahead of it, it's like, and people are just, I mean, it's bad enough that the United States, as Martin Luther King says, the biggest purveyor of violence is the United States. It's bad enough we go around the world killing people, but now we're killing our own people, and you're standing there watching it.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, "This is normal." This like he's insane. It's insanity. And
I hear you, brother.
And so when people now, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have to say it. Everybody was hair on fire when this first happened. Even Republicans was like, "Okay, we got to do something. We got to keep the economy going." But in April, when they found out it was killing mostly black and brown folks, we can't do any more stimulus packages, But Andrew Cuomo, mayor, governor, told him when it was happening with him, he says, "It's coming to y'all." And now here we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now here we are. The southern states, and we're poo-pooing like, "Oh, it's not real. It's a hoax." Really?
Exactly.
Okay. But like I said, we're going to get through this. The human, regardless of all this stuff that you see on the screens, because there's always a disconnect to what you see on the screen and what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah.
People are like, they're seeing one thing on TV, but they're seeing folks die. It's like, it's a disconnect. Once that happens, then people will make that change. And like I said, we will, as human beings, that human spirit will always come out. That positive human spirit will always triumph, even though it doesn't seem like it does at the time.
Yeah. Well, Avery, listen, I want to thank you so much for being on Jazz Talk. Man, it's been an honor to talk with you. And just a lot of insight that you gave us today. And fans will be able to watch this interview as well. But hang on, I'm about to close out the show. Well, you've heard it from Avery Sharpe. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.